Welcome to this episode of the Mama Podcast. This week we're joined by our very own Dora from Mama Academy and Alicia from Thrive Law, and we're talking all things parental and maternity rights in the workplace. Okay, so on this episode we are joined by Dora from Mama Academy and Alicia from Thrive Law. Please can you introduce yourselves, ladies? Dora, let's start with you.
Hi, so my name is Dora. I joined Mama Academy in 2022. I actually joined right after I had a baby, and I actually soon became pregnant again. And I look after all of our fundraisers and our supporters in general. So yes, I've been with the charity for a year and a half, nearly 2 years now, and I really enjoy my role.
So my name's Alicia Collinson. I'm a senior associate at Thrive Law. So Thrive is a small employment law firm. We're based up in Leeds, and we kind of do a variety of lots of different kinds of law. So we support employers and employees. We do a lot of special focus in mental health, neurodiversity, and just general wellbeing support on the part of employers. But for my part, I do a lot of the individual employee support. And I do a lot of our charitable partnerships. And I'm a mum myself, so I have a 20-month-old. And I'm really passionate about kind of maternity, pregnancy, and general kind of female support in the workplace, because I feel like even just when I started doing employment law 5 years ago, the whole landscape looks so different, even just now. So it's really, I just think it's really important to be a part of that and continue to perpetuate it.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Alicia, and we're so grateful for all of your support at the moment. So how did Thrive Law actually come about? How did you get involved with it?
So Thrive Law was founded by Jodie Hill, who has like numerous amounts of Instagram followers, and she was a barrister and then qualified as a solicitor. She's been diagnosed with ADHD more recently, but was undiagnosed at the time and had it was a mental breakdown at the time, but she now calls it her mental breakthrough, and kind of formed Thrive off the back of identifying what other law firms weren't doing, both in terms of what we do for supporting internally, but also encouraging other employers to do. And so that's kind of what Thrive was born as an employment law firm that's just different and actually puts people and thinks about the employees. And I joined, weirdly enough, because my mum saw Jodie on the local news and was like, I think you would really like her. And I was looking to move at the time. I lived down in London and I desperately wanted to move back up north and find a job that would suit me. And I emailed Jodie being like, I don't suppose you ever want to like have a chat about a position. And she was like, oh, come for an interview. So that's kind of how I joined Thrive. I just had never seen anything like it in terms of the value, like just being so values driven. And I think since then, that was back in 2018. Since then, I think a lot more companies have become really aware of like values and what they stand for and how that's perceived. But back then, especially for law firms, if anyone had a wellbeing initiative, it was much more of a, we've cut apples in the kitchen now, so you eat more fruit kind of thing, as opposed to actually things that genuinely help. So yeah, that's who we are and kind of how I joined, at least.
Amazing. And what was just to dig a little bit deeper on that, what was the trigger for you to, I guess, find an organisation that's more aligned to your purpose and values?
So I trained down in London, and what they say about some law firms is true. The hours were intense. I didn't have any time to kind of do any of my self-care. I just completely burnt out. So I suffer quite well. I was diagnosed with PTSD after my dad died in 2015, and I've suffered really badly with anxiety both pre and post that. And it just wasn't the right environment for me to actually be like any good at anything. I just failed at every turn. I wasn't a very good lawyer. I wasn't a very good wife or partner, then wife. And I just kind of had this moment where I just thought, if you spend most of your time at work, it should be somewhere that makes you feel happy and brings you like joy and gives you a purpose and you want to do it. So that was why I kind of decided that I wanted to move back and think about where my life, because everyone's different, but for me, I just felt like my life was kind of in limbo for the longer I was in London, and I just thought something's got to give. And it was that, to be more precise, it was actually one more day on a train and a tube that had broken down, and I'm very short, and I had my head in someone's armpit, and I just thought, there has to be some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and it was the end of this tube tunnel, so I just like had to start reevaluating. So yeah, that's.
I get that. This can't possibly be it. Me stood inside this person's armpit on the sweaty London tube, which is pretty horrific.
Yeah,
it's interesting though, because I think lots of people can go through. Sometimes it takes getting to rock bottom for you to actually realize what's important to you and do work that's more purposeful, which is, similar happened to me. And I know, Heidi, your story has caused you to create and find Mama Academy as well. So it's amazing what it can inspire. If we in terms of, I guess we're interested to hear about some common themes, and Dora, perhaps you can give some flavour here as well, just on parents returning to work after maternity leave. I'd be interesting to hear what sort of stuff you hear coming up.
It's interesting because I think there's this default approach where our employer clients are quite not defensive, but like really wanting to be like everything we need to know, and the same for employees. They kind of want to prove themselves and come at it really kind of like with a lot, and there's a kind of a little bit of an us versus them kind of mindset towards it, and I don't think it has to be that way. I think it can be much more collaborative when you're coming back. Obviously, we have often issues with flexible working requests and how they're received, what they look like, whether or not they're accepted or rejected, and again, I think that's something else that can come across that can be quite adversarial from both how the employer deals with it, but also in terms of if an employee assumes it's going to be rejected, you can come at it from quite a defensive way. I always say to my employee clients when they're kind of putting in flexible working requests, they either are like, it's definitely going to be rejected, so I need to be starting to look at something else, or, oh, well, I'll just, if they reject it, or I'll start thinking maybe I could just work full time anyway, and kind of adjust their expectations. And actually, I always kind of come back to, well, it is your right. So let's start from, it is your right to make this request, and it is your right to not be put to a detriment because you have made that request. So start by kind of standing in your own responsibility and understanding that this is something that you can and should do, and that technically it can't just be rejected. They have to explain why, and they have to fit it within a legal framework that exists so that you can exercise your right to have your flexible working. So I kind of always come back to that, but I think people can be quite defensive on return, and kind of everything can feel a little bit, you want to come, if they've had enough support in a maternity leave, it depends what their experience was with before, but if they felt very like out of the loop and then suddenly they're coming back, the behavior is very different, as opposed to if before they left, they felt really supported, they've had continued communication if that's what they've wanted, they've had kit days, and they have that kind of ongoing support. The way they feel about the return can be very different. The other really common one we're getting at the moment is working from home and childcare, and if it's possible to do both. And we have no case law on it. The obvious answer appears to be you probably can't do both, but it is interesting because there's a lot of nuance to that argument in terms of why employers say you can't do both. So I've seen employers try to run arguments like, well, your child could be a distraction, but their answer is, well, Sally's got a dog and the dog's really distracting, so what's the difference? And it actually is, it's really, and there's not very clear guidance on it at the moment. It's very much an employer on employer basis, but yeah, so that's quite interesting as well at the moment.
And how else can employers support colleagues that are either expecting, they've just found out they're pregnant, or may have young children as well that they've got to look after?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the support kind of when you're expecting, I think, again, really communication is key. And I think there's two different reasons why employers do things. They either do it because they have to, so it's their obligation, or they do it because they recognise that it's the right thing to do and they want their employees to be happy and healthy. Now, I would prefer everyone to do things for that second reason, and they would be very, very supportive and communicative and do things because it is the right thing to do. But also they need to bear in mind that legally they are obliged to request MAT 1B forms, talk through what their statutory maternity dates are going to look like, make it clear that kit days are available. They don't seem to be doing that at the moment, and then mothers are turning around and being like, oh, I would have had an opportunity to top up SMP during this cost of living crisis, but no one ever really made that clear what that would look like. So I think it's all about communication and support, isn't it? And you can choose how much you can go for bare minimum, which is the legal bare minimum of what you have to do, or you can really provide further support, things like coaching, or just even little things like, what does your notification form look like? Does your notification form just say, what day is your baby coming? What do you want to do? When do you want to come back? And is it really, or does it have other information like, how do you want us to contact you? Do you want us to throw your baby shower or not? Do you want us to think about, do you want us to send you cards? Do you want to come visit? Do you want to bring the baby? And just trying to make it think about things that are actually genuinely going to affect that individual rather than just your employee. And if you invest in them before they go, in all likelihood, they will come back and pay that back in dividends, because people remember how you made them feel. And I think in terms of new parents, I mean, it's all about, insofar as industry allows, being mindful of flexibility, being mindful that people have new pressures that they maybe they underestimated and didn't realize what they were going to be like before. Like Thrive's a really good example, because I only came back in January, and I so much thought I would just be like the same person who left, and I'm not. The way my brain thinks is very, very different. In a lot of ways, I'm probably better with the individuals because I'm a lot more empathetic, but I struggle to concentrate a little bit more. I had absolutely ages where I said to Jodie, I was like, I actually just think I'm failing because I can't do things at the same pace that I was doing them before. And trying to be mindful of what are you expecting when people come back, because you struggle when you've had 2 weeks off for holiday. So imagine when you've had a year off and you've had, in some cases, the most traumatic thing that's ever going to happen to your body happen, plus all the upheaval that goes with breastfeeding or sleepless nights or behavioural concerns, or is she meant to be walking yet because she's not, whatever it may be. Your brain is just in a completely different place. So I think employers will and do well to remember that and think about, are there adaptations we can put into place? Are there coaching, and can we do something for your confidence? If you're a really big employer, putting together like new parent networks is brilliant, because you're giving people the platform to talk about it with each other and say, do you ever think about this? So yeah, there's lots of things that can be done, and lots of people coming up with really great ways to do it as well.
That's really interesting, actually. I was just thinking about you, Dora, as well, because I remember when you went on maternity leave, I was trying not to get you to rush any decisions, because I was thinking once you actually have your baby, things will be completely different, because then you'll have 2 children to look after and life will seem so much different. So tell us about your experience, Dora, because I'd really like to hear it from your point of view.
So what I can say is, like you, I also struggle with anxiety and depression, and I have 2 children. And when you have children, I mean, being an anxious person, especially when you're pregnant, especially having high-risk pregnancies, it's a very worrying time. And you get anxious and you do worry about your baby. So I think ultimately, from an employee and an employer perspective, a mom or an expectant parent should be able to focus on not worrying about their job, but looking after themselves, looking after their body. And I think expectant parents and moms are more than capable of doing an amazing job, an incredible job whilst they are pregnant, as long as they are looked after and they are supported. And what I can say is, from experience, when I had my first child, I didn't feel comfortable discussing my anxiety and my depression with my employer, which I think adds pressure, because I felt anxious anyway, and I was pregnant and COVID hit, so there was layers and layers and layers of anxiety, and I also had a high risk pregnancy, so I think because of that, whilst I was pregnant, I was struggling. Going on maternity leave, I was struggling. I wasn't quite sure how to communicate my expectations whilst, I was on maternity leave with my employer and so on and so forth. And I was just worried because there is a lot of negative feedback from other moms. A lot of moms talk about the discrimination that they face whilst they are pregnant, during pregnancy, whilst they are on maternity leave, and so on. So in my first pregnancy, I really struggled, but I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't have that relationship with my employer to discuss my anxiety and my depression and my struggles. And I actually have changed jobs after I had my first baby, after I returned from maternity leave, and I joined Mama Academy in January. I started in January 2022. And what I can say is, very shortly afterwards, I found out I was pregnant. And I think we all agree that starting a new job and finding out you're pregnant, I was really concerned and I was really worried, especially because I work for a very small organization, but I had so much faith in the organization and in what we do and in Heidi and in the cause that I actually discussed my pregnancy with Heidi very early on. And I remember, and I think as moms, I think we all sort of sympathize when you break the news to your employer that, hey, I'm pregnant, especially if you join the charity 6 weeks earlier. You're going to be like, oh gosh, how is she going to react? What's she going to say? Like, I only just started my probationary period, and whilst you are trying your best, you want to be able to do your best. You want to be able to focus on your job. You don't want to worry about whether, because something happened in your personal life, you're going to lose your job, or whether they're going to not renew your contract, or they say, oh, actually, you didn't complete your probationary period, we are not really happy with you, because all of these are very rare possibilities. And I remember, I think I probably was around 6 or 7 weeks pregnant. And again, going back to my own mental health struggles, I'm really anxious. So I couldn't cope, and I just called Heidi, and I still remember the conversation. I called Heidi, and I was fully expecting her to say, oh my gosh, like, you just started with us. And I was worried about her reaction. And I remember I called her and I said, look, Heidi, I'm pregnant. I just found out. It is a big surprise for me, but I'm really excited. And I just want to be honest with you. And I remember her saying, oh my God, Dora, I'm really pleased that you told me this. And I was like, okay, what's next? And she was like, I'm really pleased because now I know how I can support you. Because I know you told me that you had a high-risk pregnancy before, and I know how to support you now to make sure that this time around you are supported and you can focus on, having a healthy mental being. You feel calm, and that you can focus on your job. You don't need to worry about your job security, or you don't need to worry about, needing to go to maternity appointments. It was a completely different experience. And part of it is probably communication, but part of it is, and a huge part of it is, working for an organization who, they wanted to look after me as an expectant mom. And I think Heidi proved, and this organization proved, that you don't need to be a big company and a big charity or a bigger organization to treat somebody right, because Mama Academy is tiny. And I think, I'm fairly sure, I was the very first employer who ever been pregnant at Mama Academy. But Heidi, I put her on the spot. She never had a pregnant employee before. I put her on the spot because I just called her. I didn't send her an email. I didn't pre-warn her. I was just like, hey, Heidi, I hope you're doing well. I'm pregnant. And she just treated me with so much respect and kindness. And I really hope that afterwards, during my pregnancy, I did my best to work for her as hard as I could and, achieve certain things, because I wanted to prove her that, if you treat people with respect and if you treat expectant parents well, it will pay dividends, and you're going to get that back. And throughout my maternity leave, I didn't have the concern of whether I need to return to work, whether I want to return to work, whether I'm going to get the same position back, or whether Heidi going to change my contract, or all the worries again that expectant parents have, because I trusted Heidi. And we had that relationship where I trusted her, that I knew I have a job to come back to. I can focus on my baby. I can focus on enjoying my pregnancy and my maternity. And when I come back, I can start again.
I think the point you made about SMEs is really interesting, like small companies is really interesting, because actually a lot of the small companies we deal with are really keen to support, but they've never had it before. They actually fundamentally don't know what they're meant to do. So we have clients who are as in the same way, who are like, oh, she told us we're pregnant, we really want to help her, but we don't know, we literally just do not know what we're meant to do. So I think one thing that I would say is, and it sounds like you guys are really nailing it as well, is like having that open culture to the way people feel like they can talk about it at any point. Because I mean, when you're really early pregnant, you're also more likely to be really unwell and be like actually just absolutely shattered and sick, and heaven knows. And actually, a lot of people don't tell their employer because obviously there's the 12-week point where people are more likely to communicate anyway. But you're probably going to take more sickness absence, and you feel you're in this weird point where you're like, I'm sick, but I can't say why, even though it is protected because it's related to pregnancy, but I don't know how to communicate that. So having that culture where people feel like you can say it earlier and then people feel a lot more like almost rip the band-aid off, that's done now, and then you feel more empowered in that knowledge. Something else when you work for small businesses, and I always say, is we kind of trying to work together, because it's new to everyone. You're having a new baby, a small company maybe doesn't know what to do. So trying to kind of put together and be like, well, this is everything I think I need to do. This is everything that maybe you can do and I've thought of, and trying to kind of collaborate on it, because people do want to support you. And if you say, these are the things that I think would maybe help, or these are the things that I think you need to do, they'll be really grateful for that, because it is difficult. It is hard to try and figure out what that looks like and make sure you're doing completely the right thing, and it is a bit of a minefield for some people. So I think that's a really good point as well.
What advice would you give, Alicia, to parents that need to tell their employee that they're pregnant and what their maternity plans are?
Well, I think it's so much about remembering that you haven't done anything wrong. It's amazing how guilty we feel still. Like, I absolutely adore my work. And I remember when I told Jodie I was pregnant, I remember saying, I'm really sorry. And I just thought, like, why am I? She was like, why are you sorry? That's amazing. You've been trying for ages. This is fab. But you just have this kind of, we feel so much association, so much, especially if we like our job, so much kind of association with that. So the first point is, don't feel guilty. You've done nothing wrong. And you are in kind of, I don't want to call it the position of power, but you are protected. So you should, although you do feel vulnerable from a whole lot of different ways, you should be bearing in mind that you are now protected. Someone can't turn around. Doesn't mean people don't, but they can't turn around and say, oh, well, okay, you're fired.
I was just wondering what parents can do if they feel discriminated. What should they do? Are there any time limits?
Yes. So time limits are, so effectively, when we talk about parents, we need to be focusing on, let's start out with mothers, or at least the person who is having the baby, because they're protected under maternity and pregnancy, like the protected characteristic of maternity and pregnancy. Now, there's a whole bunch of thing about the protected period from which they're protected from redundancy, but it's slightly different and nuanced, and it only applies in redundancy. Protection from maternity and pregnancy is literally from the second you tell them you're pregnant, or they suspect that you might be, all the way up to kind of when you come back, and things associated with breastfeeding, whatever it may be. And you're entitled to not be directly discriminated or indirectly discriminated against because of that. Now, if they feel that, so let's say in an absolute worst case scenario, you tell Bob, I'm pregnant, and Bob says, oh, okay, well, you are fired, which I haven't seen in those exact terms, but I've seen very, very close to. You would then have 3 months. That would be your act of discrimination. You have to do something about it within 3 months. And it's a whole, there are campaigns to extend this 3 months time limit, but you have 3 months from the last act of discrimination to go to ACAS, which is the start of escalating any dispute. If you miss your time limits, they can't hear it. And it is literally as simple as that. There is such little time. There's so little examples of when they will extend it. So even if your discrimination is, let's say, whilst you're on maternity leave. So let's say while you're on maternity leave, you find out that someone's been they're planning on not having you return, they've replaced you full time, they've told everyone at work that you're not coming back, even if you've not agreed from that conversation is probably going to be the act of discrimination, and you're going to want to make sure that it's in time. So even if you're on maternity leave, you probably have about 3 months in which you will have 3 months in which you want to make sure that you're escalating that through ACAS or getting legal advice to make sure you're doing that. It's one of the things that really frustrates me about the legal system, because that is not a long time for women who have just had a baby or are trying to balance everything else. And it really should be longer for that specific example, because let's face it, they're already juggling a whole load of plates. Why are you adding litigation to it? But that is the main thing, is it's something to absolutely be mindful of, is that if you are the victim of discrimination, if you're dismissed, then you've got 3 months from your dismissal date. If you're the victim but you're still there, raise a grievance, do whatever you need to do, but put something in your diary for that 3 months date, wherever it needs to be, and go to ACAS when you get to that date if it's not resolved.
It's mad, isn't it? Because I had something similar happen to me, and I live in a different country anyway, but there was this whole like cross jurisdiction thing of whether I could argue in the UK courts, and to be honest, it was just all so complicated that I gave up because of that 3 months. You know, I had postnatal depression and was just like trying to get through the days, you know, so it's impossible to take that route for a lot of people. You have to be pretty strong if it's immediately after you've had a baby to charge forward with that.
Yeah, and we have so many people who like come back from maternity leave and are then made redundant, or they're made so they never really go back, and then they take all their holiday and they get a new job because they need a new job, because they have to figure out how to get their earnings, and they get all of those ducks in a row, which is completely fair enough. And then they come to us and they're like, oh, you know, all these things happened, these are all the awful things they said, and we're like, it's definitely discrimination, but you've missed your window. And that's really difficult, because then there's no repercussions and there's no justice in that, is there really?
Yeah, hopefully it changes. I know there's lots of campaigning going on, so hopefully that does work. Dora, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask a question, because I know that the flexible working breakfast, employers have 3 months to actually reply to that.
Yeah.
So if you are being discriminated against, and you make a flexible working breakfast, and your employer takes their time and takes 3 months to reply, where is the end point? Where is the point where, okay, you know, it's too late to go to ACAS?
Yeah, so it's technically 3 months from the last act. So if something kind of reignites it, so let's say they then rejected your flexible working request, which is not in of itself discriminatory, so that's why I would always be cautious anyway. But if they, let's say, they then denied it because they said, well, you know, you've got children, we don't want anyone who has children to look after, that's blatantly discriminatory because of sex, that's a new act. Now, if they're all linked and you can say they're done by the same person, they're part of a series of acts, then the last one, as long as the last one is in time, then the rest of them can come in. But it's just something to be mindful of, because employers are savvy and they know how to push you out. So like most commonly with dismissals, so if someone is dismissed and you appeal that dismissal, employers will quite often then deliberately take more than 3 months to have the outcome of your appeal of your dismissal. But you're timed out then, because it's not from the date of that outcome, it's from the date of your dismissal. So and they know that they're not dumb. They know they know where they're at with that. So it's just things like that to be mindful of. So if you are dismissed, you can't. It's not in your interest to wait and see if they reinstate. You can always take it back. It's free. So you can always put something in, and then if it resolves itself, you just withdraw it. There's no consequences to that, and that's much stronger for you than it would be to wait and then let them kind of get away with it almost.
I'm also wondering, Alicia, what the current maternity rights are for bereaved parents as well, parents that lose their baby, because obviously that was my first experience, and my employer was absolutely fantastic for me, I have to say. They let me take my time, they let me decide when I wanted to go back. They talked to me about how I would go back and what they wanted people to know and what not to know, etc. So what are the current maternity rights around bereavement leave?
So if you are more than 26 weeks pregnant, you are still entitled to your maternity leave, but you classed as a bereaved parent, so you're entitled to statutory parental bereavement leave, and so is the partner involved in that. So you get two, but it's 2 weeks and it's paid at a statutory rate. Now, a lot of employers enhance that and change that. But if you're over 26 weeks, you still also get you're still entitled, even if you sadly don't have a living baby, you're still entitled to maternity leave in any event. Lots of people don't take that full time because maybe they wouldn't want to, but you have that option open and available to you. If you're less than 26 weeks, then it would likely count as sickness absence, which is probably not sufficient, but that's the legal position. But there should, if your baby's born alive before 26 weeks, you still fall within the maternity piece. But obviously, if it's just a miscarriage, I say just, that's a horrible thing to say. If it is a miscarriage, then before 26 weeks, then it's just sickness absence. Now, as you say, a lot of people are very willing and want to enhance that and be very, very supportive. And I think that's great. But legally, yeah, it's just statutory bereavement and your maternity leave if you're past 26 weeks.
Again, I know there's lots of campaigning that's going on at the moment to try and change that, and it's changing all the time, which is great. But yeah, my employer was just so respectful and understanding, and they it was all discretionary, but they gave me full maternity rights, and it was up to me when I wanted to go back, etc. But I know that's a very personal decision.
Yeah, we've got a lot of almost all of our employer clients are always looking for what they can do for stillbirth, parental loss. A lot of employers, which I really respect, are tying in abortion to be equal equal kind of entitlements as well, and I find that really, really respectful. And the question we tend to get from employers is, what's everyone else doing and what might people need? And I find that, because I think when we talk about pregnancy and we talk about and employment, we can kind of suddenly go, oh, discrimination, and feel like it's really adversarial. But overwhelmingly, there are always going to be stories and negative things happening. But overwhelmingly, employers do want to do the right thing. And employers do recognise increasingly the value in supporting the women in their workplace.
Yeah, we've got some information actually on our website, which is about how to support a colleague coming back that's lost a baby, and also, how you can support someone as a friend as well. So we have also got information there on the website for parents too.
Amazing.
Thank you. And I think final question, unless anyone's got anything to add, and we just touched on some of it then, but what are the positive changes you've seen happening, Alicia, recently?
I genuinely do feel, maybe it's because I work at Thrive now, and I used to have a different client base in London. I had a lot of American clients, and in America it's completely different. Like the entitlements we used to have we had an American client once who called and was like, well, it's based in our office in London, but how much leave does she get? And we were like, well, she gets 52 weeks. And he was like, what? Like, that's a whole year? What's she gonna do? I was like, raise her child. Like, that's so I think maybe it is slightly my exposure, but I do think generally employers are so engaged on the topic of well-being, and so engaged on what can we actually, they recognise so much more than they used to the value of supporting your employees, and the fact that happier and healthier employees will be better employees. And I think that applies also when we talk about support for pregnant women and seeing those changes. I think there's a lot more knowledge around and support for people who are perhaps having fertility issues, kind of recurrent miscarriages, whatever it may be. People are motivated by wanting to do the right thing. I also think it's very interesting because there's studies to do with different expectations of different generations, and as we start to see kind of the younger generations come up, they actually expect those well-being support and that kind of things, that kind of respect of the individual and looking at every single person as an individual to be in place already. So I think that's kind of driving some of the change as well in terms of what that recruitment looks like. But I think there is so much positive change. Like, I think we've extended the protective period so that it applies to both men and women whilst they're when they returned from statutory leave, because we were seeing a lot of fathers when they tried to do things like shared parental leave, even though that is an excessively complicated system. We were seeing a lot of people being victimized because of that, and actually that protection is going to really help. We've seen a lot more open-mindedness around other forms of families and thinking about how to support equally with adoption leave and maternity leave, and making sure all of that kind of evens out. So I think there is so much positivity and so much kind of engagement on positive change and support moving forward. It doesn't mean that there aren't still, as I say, those horror stories and those people who feel unsupported and those people who feel anxious, quite rightly. But I think overwhelmingly, people are trying to support in every way that they can, and are very open-minded to that.
That's good. And I think like you said, I think sometimes people just don't know what to say. And so sometimes the awkwardness causes people to say the wrong thing as well. And then when you're on the other side, you're, perhaps more sensitive given the current situation. So it all kind of builds up, whereas actually just those open and honest conversations up front are just so powerful with your employer.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, I think in general, in terms of we're talking about employer respect for employees, I think COVID has quite a lot to do with that, in terms of we all got a glimpse into each other's lives much more than we maybe had before, and we kind of all have started to appreciate from that. People did have home lives, people had families, people had things, and you would see more of that. And I think that's really influenced kind of the continued trajectory of how do we support what that looks like and keeping that going. So I think obviously COVID was disastrous in a whole heap of ways, but I do think it'd be very interesting to, in a kind of butterfly effect world, to see where we would be without that. And it's interesting. There's a whole bunch of other really positive things like flexible working requests are changing, and there's going to be hopefully some changes to make it so that you are assumed to be allowed to flexibly work unless you're told not to, and all these kinds of things are just tipping the balance slightly. The government childcare will really help working parents, if that actually ever comes through, but it will come through. But I was talking to a nursery and they were like, we know as much as you do. Isn't it coming in like 3 months? Yes, it is. I think it's the more we respect the fact that if we think about it more long over time, the more we respect the fact that everyone wants to work for employers and everyone sees the value in work, but also sees the value in having children and wants to do that and wants to have their families and wants to have that balance. And I think that's what everyone's searching for. And so it's in employers' interest to provide that, because otherwise they'll just go somewhere else.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Alicia. Thank you so much. It's been I've got so much to digest. There's a lot of information there, but thank you. If anyone wants any advice, that's employees or employers, how can they find you?
So we've got a website, thrivelaw.co.uk. My email address is on there. There's a picture of me with red hair. Don't have red hair anymore, but I'm on there. So that's probably the best way. We've got an information box, and you can send some details in there, and we can arrange a call off the back of that. Happy to kind of have a chat about. I think I am on Instagram, but I will see it if you message me. But I think it's just get in touch in whatever way you feel most comfortable, especially if you feel like, I mean, we've all been there, where you're so anxious that you just want to tell somebody and just feel like, well, I've checked off at least the starting point of talking about it with someone on my list, and then someone else can kind of guide me through. I'm happy to be that guide.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. I don't know if anyone has any questions came up, I suppose, if anyone had any thoughts while we were going.
All covered, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And thanks, Dora.
Thanks so much, Dora, for joining us.
No, thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.